I just want to start by saying that if you do content creating full time, kudos to you. This is probably my 8th take, and I haven't even gotten my introduction yet, and it's only supposed to be like 10 seconds. But anyway, in my last video, I talked about why I switched from aerospace engineering to medicine. If I can successfully make this video, I will tell you how I did it. Every step from graduating from undergrad to getting into med school. Okay, so fingers crossed. Let's try. Okay, still struggling, but let's give this another shot. Step 1, figure out your why. This may not seem that important, but figure out your why, write it down, post it on the wall, text it to yourself, email it to yourself. Know your why, and it needs to be a solid why. My why was that God wanted me to do medicine, and that's what I've gone back to for the past 7 years. I'm sure you already know this, but medical school is hard. I mean, I don't say this to discourage anyone. I came in with a degree that taught me a thing or two about studying. But medical school?
Sorry for the laugh.
I have never studied so much in my life. In my life. I mean, it's not so much the material, but the volume. There's a saying that medical school is like drinking from a fire hose. Imagine. They're not lying. And even if the studying is not difficult for you, at some point it gets very challenging. Whether it's the 100 lectures you need to study for every exam, or it's the board exam, step 1. Step 1 is 7 hours. Step 2 is 8 hours. Even if you get through those just fine, 3rd year of medical school, when you're doing clerkships, taking care of patients, still having to go home to study, still having to exercise and sleep and eat and spend time with friends and spend time with God and wake up early and smell the flowers and talk to your family. At some point, things will get hard. This is not to scare you. This is simply being honest. Your why is what's going to carry you through those times. For me, remembering that God brought me here, and if He brought me this far, He will get me through it, that gave me a certain level of confidence. I'm really excited when I get a message from someone saying, I'd love to go to medical school. But a couple of times when I've asked people, why do you want to go to medical school? The reason is along the line of, I don't like my current career, so I'm thinking about a change. Or medicine is a prestigious field, and so I'd like to be a part of it. I can't knock anyone's reason at the end of the day, but you not liking your current career and just wanting something different, I don't think that that is something that will carry you on your most difficult days. If you currently don't like what you do, medicine, of all things, I don't think that's the best replacement. Except you have a passion for this, it may not work out. I've heard a couple of people say money, for example. Yes, doctors do make a lot of money, but when you consider that our work week is typically 80 hours compared to a normal person who works 40 hours, the money might not be worth it for you. When you consider that after 4 years of medical school, you still have to do anywhere from 3 years to 7 or 8 years of residency training before you even get to the point where you're making good money, it may not be worth it. When you consider the fact that a lot of us graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, the money might not be worth it, because even when you start making good money, you still have all that debt to pay off. So figure out your why and make sure it's a solid why. Make sure that when you think about it, it's something that will carry you through your most difficult days. So now that we have our why, step 2 is making a plan and creating a timeline. From my research at the time, I discovered that I needed a 4-year degree and also the prerequisite courses, including 2 semesters of biology, 2 semesters of chemistry, 2 semesters of organic chemistry and biochemistry, along with the accompanying labs where applicable. I already had my degree, so to complete my prerequisites, I decided to do a post-bacc program. And this is a program you do after you graduate from undergrad, and it's supposed to help you transition to professional school. In my case, medical school. I wanted to start medical school as quickly as I could, so I only considered one-year post-bacc programs. I found a few programs with good track records, and so the next thing was to determine how soon I could start. I graduated in mid-May, but most of the post-bacc programs I was looking at started in early May or right around the time that I graduated. It was a little overwhelming for me to graduate and immediately move, settle down, and start a new program, so I gave myself a year between graduation and starting my post-bacc program. So now my timeline was graduate in May 2018, apply for my post-bacc in summer of 2018, and then start my post-bacc in the spring of 2019. The next item on my timeline was the MCAT, which is the Medical College Admission Test. From my research, medical schools would start looking at applications in July, so I knew that I wanted to take it in May or June, so I added that to my timeline too. Once the MCAT was done, my plan was then to submit my application in June of 2020. In America, it typically takes a year between submitting your application and starting medical school because interview season takes several months. So now my timeline looked like this. Graduate in May 2018, submit my post-bacc applications in summer of 2018, start my post-bacc in May of 2019, complete my post-bacc in May of 2020, take the MCAT in May or June of 2020, submit my med school application in June or July of 2020, begin medical school in August of 2021, and graduate from medical school in May of 2025. I want to mention here that if you are more familiar with the medical field, then you may not need to be as regimented as me. You may not need to make a timeline and write things down like I did. But recall that I was coming from engineering. To me, this was very overwhelming. I felt like there were a million moving parts, and I just didn't want to miss anything. So making a timeline at the beginning was important for my sanity, really, and for staying organized. Of course, I knew that things might change. My timeline may not work out exactly as I made it, but for me, it was a skeleton that I would flesh out as time went on. So now, back to my timeline. Let's talk about each of those steps in a little more detail. Let's start with degrees and post-bacc programs. Please know that, similarly to me, you don't need to major in biology or chemistry to go to medical school, at least not here in the US. I have a few classmates actually who also studied engineering. However, they knew from the beginning that they wanted to go to medical school. They just liked engineering and they chose that as their undergraduate degree. The difference between them and me, though, is that since they knew that they were going to medical school eventually, they got their prereqs done while they were working on their engineering degree. So, they took the chemistry courses, the biology courses, in addition to their regular engineering courses. Since I didn't do that, I had to get my prereqs another way, and that's why I chose the post-bacc program. If you are like me and you need the prerequisites, this might still look different for you. A post-bacc program was good for me because I wanted the structure. My post-bacc program didn't just offer me the prereqs. It also offered me a guidance counselor that was familiar with the med school application process. It offered me study sessions for the MCAT. And more broadly, I had a community of people who were working towards the same goal as me, and I needed that. Even if you aren't a career changer, though, a post-bacc program might still be right for you. For example, some students do have a pre-med degree, but they still do a post-bacc to enhance their GPA. Some students retake the courses that they did in undergrad to get a better grade, and some students just do more advanced courses during the post-bacc. For example, in my last semester of my post-bacc, in addition to my prereq courses, I needed a few more credits to be a full-time student, so I took medical parasitology, and that was considered an advanced course. A master's degree is also an option for some people who already have a pre-med degree and are thinking about medical school. For example, on this website, this school gives a side-by-side comparison of their post-bacc program and their master's degree program. As I mentioned, this transition is going to look different for everyone, and for some, neither a master's nor a post-bacc might be right for you. For example, if you have an engineering degree, but you go to a school that has ample resources for pre-meds, and you have access to those resources, then you may not need a structured program. You might just decide to take the prereqs in your own time, take the MCAT in your own time, and then apply when the time is right for you. Ultimately, you have to figure out what will work best for you. Please keep in mind that things do change with the med school application process, so things might be slightly different today than they were for me. A great resource to stay up to date would be the websites for the schools that you're applying to, and also the Association of American Medical Colleges, and I'll have a link in the description box for you. So back to my post-bacc. Once I was settled on the schools that I wanted to apply to, I could start working on my application. A common theme in the med school application process is rolling admissions, and that means that schools look at applications continuously and release decisions continuously too. With this in mind, I knew that even though post-bacc applications would be open from late summer till, early spring, I knew that they would start giving away their positions, so I wanted to make sure my application was submitted as quickly as possible. The first thing was to figure out who was going to write my letters of recommendation. Some people will have your recommendation letter written, edited, submitted in 2 business hours. Others might need a gentle push and, a few reminders. So it's important to start early. If you have someone in mind, even if you don't want them to write the letter right now, at least ask them if they would be okay with doing that. And just put it in their mind that this is something that you might want in the near future. I also started drafting my personal statement. And now, after writing several of them, I know that I go through different iterations before I finally settle on a version that I like. So once again, you want to start early. Once you have a draft, it's important that you have at least a couple of people proofread it for you, and make sure that you're choosing people that you know will be honest with you. Again, some people might take a while to get back to you, so make sure you're starting early and giving these people enough time to read it, edit it, and send it back. And give yourself enough time also to apply those edits and even send it back to them a second time, just so they can look at it again. Or you get it from the first person, apply those edits, and then send it to the next person. Either way, give yourself ample time to do this. Next, I became familiar with the transcript ordering process for my school. This probably won't take long, but make sure that, all your holds are cleared, all payments are made, so that when you are ready to order your transcript and send it out to these schools, nothing delays that. Next, I decided what activities would be going on my application, including the jobs that I held, the volunteering that I did, and the leadership positions that I held. Job-wise, I'd worked as a front desk assistant for 3 years. I'd also been a church nursery worker for 3 years, so I added those 2 experiences. And after graduation, I briefly worked as a coding instructor for little kids, so I added that too. I'd volunteered at the local hospital, and I'd also volunteered at the student food pantry, so I plan on putting those 2 down. And for leadership positions, I was an event chair for the African Students Association, and I was also a peer mentor for first-year engineering students. I also verified how many of each of these hours I had, and because this was the period between graduating and submitting my application, this was a perfect time to work some additional hours if I wanted to. For example, at the hospital, I would only go in once a week while I was in school, but because it was the summertime, I could go in twice a week and have some additional hours to put on my application. I actually only started volunteering in the student food pantry after I graduated, but because I had that time, I was able to gather like 37 hours. So it worked out. That was something else that I could put on my application. Once applications opened up, I had everything I needed, so putting together my application was very quick and easy. After my post-bacc application was submitted, I also started shadowing. I got introduced to an OBGYN and I got to spend a few days in his office. One mistake I made was that after my time in their office, the manager asked if I wanted a recommendation letter. However, my post-bacc application was already submitted, so I couldn't add it to that. And I didn't want a letter because I felt as though it was too early to start asking for med school recommendation letters. My plan was to wait a year and then contact them again just so I would have a more recent date on the letter. However, by the time I started my medical school application, I reached back out to the office, but the office manager had retired and the doctor didn't remember me. And he was honest. He just told me that, I don't remember you and I don't know you well enough to write a letter, so I'm sorry. It happens. So if you have the opportunity to get a letter, just take the letter and keep it, and you can use it later. So back to my timeline. I graduated, I submitted my post-bacc application. I was working, but now I was in a weird spot. My lease ended in July. Post-bacc didn't start until May, and I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to sign a new lease, so I decided to move back home to Nigeria with my parents. Before I moved back home, I moved in with a friend for a little while, hoping that I'd find a research opportunity or a better job, but I didn't. So I just moved back to Nigeria for a few months. And this is really when the loneliness set in and just all the thoughts. My application was submitted, but I didn't know if I was going to get in. While I was back home, I continued to look for research opportunities, but I couldn't find any, and I started to feel like I was spiraling. So I decided to start shadowing again. Thankfully, I was accepted to shadow at the teaching hospital close to my parents' house. And I went back to my Google Drive because I remember putting down some of those experiences. And when I found the Excel sheet, I was shocked. I didn't just put down some of my experiences, I put down everything. I mean, color coded and everything. I recorded every single day, everything I saw, who I saw it with. I even recorded my 30-minute lunch break here. Why did I feel the need to record my 30-minute lunch break? I shadowed at this hospital for about 2 months, and by the end of my time there, I had about 175 hours of shadowing. This was such a blessing because my intention was to start shadowing during my post-bacc year, but as I'll talk about later, that didn't work out. So I'm really glad that I did this. So if you can, start shadowing, start volunteering, all those experiences, start doing them as early as possible. You never know what's going to help you. Even if you can only do 2 hours a week, for example, if you do 2 hours a week for 1 year and you only even work 40 weeks out of the year, that's still 80 hours, and that's substantial. So do what you can and start early. Shortly after my shadowing experience ended, I started receiving acceptances to post-bacc programs, and I was ecstatic. So now I could plan my transition back to the US and into my post-bacc program. So if you're like me and you have a gap year, it's a great time to start or continue your research, your volunteering, your job experiences. It's also a great time to start reaching out to people. Start reaching out to doctors if you can. Start reaching out to students who are already in medical school and can give you advice. Look for a mentor. It is never too early to start building your network. On to the next step. I started my post-bacc program in May of 2019, and it was 4 semesters, so summer A, summer B, the fall semester, and the spring semester. Aside from working on my prereqs, I also began volunteering at the local hospital. I believe I went in once a week on Saturday. I initially started with Saturday, then I started going in on Thursdays, just to give myself the weekends free. Side note, this might be a good way to get your vaccines if you're not up to date on all of them. Because I wanted to volunteer, the hospital required that I provide my vaccine records. At the time, I couldn't find a couple of my records and I wasn't up to date on some of them, and so they offered to give me those vaccines for free. If you decide to volunteer and the facility offers that, I would absolutely take it because you're going to need these vaccines to get into medical school anyway. If you can knock those out and not have to pay for them, that's perfect, especially if you don't have a primary care provider or if you don't have insurance at the time. And I think at that time I might not have had insurance, so it worked out perfectly for me. So I was doing my prereqs, I was volunteering, and I also started doing some research with my biochem professor. He was doing some research on HIV protease, so I started going in about twice a week to work on that with him. And I was set to present at the North Carolina Academy of Sciences, but unfortunately, because of COVID, everything was canceled. But I still put that on my application that I had a presentation ready, but because of COVID, I wasn't able to do it. I also started working a couple of side jobs just to make some money, but I made sure to not do anything that would take too much of my time. I believe that both jobs totaled about 10 or 12 hours a week. It wasn't too stressful, and I was able to make some money while I was in school, so it worked out for me. Now with shadowing, as I mentioned, I was so happy I'd done some while I was in Nigeria because believe it or not, over the entire year during my post-bacc, I got a massive 4 hours of shadowing done. And this happened because, first of all, I hadn't anticipated how busy I would be. For example, summer A and summer B are only 6-week semesters, So the schedule was packed. Also, even though there were doctors that were willing to let me shadow, a lot of them had time in the morning. But then I was in class, so I couldn't do it. COVID was also a factor. Towards the end of my post-bacc, I had a little more time and I arranged an opportunity with a doctor. But the day I started shadowing with her, we had to cancel everything because everything was shutting down due to COVID. So once again, I am so glad I had shadowed in Nigeria because I had all these hours that I would then put on my application when I was ready. Talking about COVID, I'm sure I don't have to explain this to anyone. It changed a lot of things. COVID happened in March of 2020, and that was during my last semester of my post-bacc. Thankfully, COVID didn't affect my prereqs because we just started taking classes online instead of in person. But it affected everything else. With the MCAT, for example, all dates were canceled. And we couldn't reschedule because we weren't sure what was happening. Nobody was sure what was happening. So we just had to wait for an announcement. I don't remember what date I was registered for initially, but by the time rescheduling happened, I got July 7 as my test date. Even though the MCAT got pushed back, thankfully everything else in the med school application process got pushed back too, so it worked out. Because I wasn't taking the MCAT till July and I finished my post-bacc program in May, it gave me some time to start working on my med school application. I had started drafting my personal statement, so during this time I finished it up, got it edited by a couple of people, and that was ready. Completing the rest of my application was also relatively easy because I was using a lot of the same experiences that I'd used on my post-bacc application. I submitted my application on the 6th of June 2020, and again, it was important for me to submit my application early because med school applications actually have a processing time. Thankfully, mine only took 20 days, so my application was processed by the 26th of June. Apparently, though, this can take much longer if you submit later in the application cycle, so I would advise that you submit as early as you can. Also, it's okay to submit before you do the MCAT because even if your application gets processed, once your MCAT scores are released, that can easily be added to the application. So that's exactly what I did. Once my application was submitted, I had a full month to study for the MCAT. I'd already been studying before this, but this month was now my dedicated period to just focus on the MCAT. I think one of the only positive things that came out of COVID was that MCAT scores were released earlier than normal. So I got my scores within 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks. And also, the date on which schools could start accessing applications was pushed back. So by the time schools could access my application, it was complete. All my information was in there and my scores were already in there. So it was good to go. So let's go over my application in a little more detail and look at some of my stats. My post-bacc GPA was 3.9. My MCAT score was 512. And to break that down, in the chemistry section, I scored 130, in cars 126, and in both biology and behavioral sciences, I scored 128. I had 203 shadowing hours, and I shadowed different specialties, including surgery, OBGYN, pediatrics, family medicine, emergency medicine, psychiatry, and pathology. I had 366 volunteering hours, and those were done at 2 hospitals, a student food pantry, and I also ran a drive every year at home, during which we'd supply low-income mothers with hospital supplies. I had 1 research experience, and even though I didn't present at the state conference, I was still able to present at the school where I was completing my post-bacc, and that totaled 29 hours. For paid employment, I had 142 hours working as a coding instructor. I had 216 hours working at the Disability Testing Center at my undergrad school. I had 720 hours working as a nursery attendant at a church. I also had 1,116 hours working as a front desk assistant in the engineering department. Note that with the last 2 jobs, I worked them for several years, so I had enough time to amass these hours. Extracurriculars and leadership. As the event chair with the African Students Association, I had 234 hours. I also worked as a peer mentor, but I didn't list this as an activity of its own. I think I talked about it within one of those other activities. I had 3 letters of recommendation. One was a committee letter from the post-bacc program, and 2 were from professors who had taught me during my post-bacc program. So, medical school application was submitted summer of 2020, but it wasn't over yet. Most, if not all schools, will send you their secondary application, which is where they ask questions like, why do you want to come to our school? Tell us about a specific experience. A lot of schools have similar questions, but there are also schools where you look at the application and you're just like, what? What? Fill them out as they come in. They typically won't come in at the same time, but once they do start rolling in, you want to start filling those out and sending them back in. You don't want to get too overwhelmed with having like 12 secondary applications waiting for you. After I submitted my applications and secondary applications started rolling in, I still had quite a bit of free time and I knew I still had to stay busy. Preferably, I wanted a job because I wanted to continue making money and saving money in preparation for med school. I also wanted something related to medicine, so I was applying to mostly doctor's offices. It was kind of hard to get a job though because a lot of places wanted you to have some certification, whether this was medical assistant or CNA, whatever it was. And I was not willing to do that. I wasn't going to spend a bunch of time and money working on a certification only to use it for 2 or 3 months. My plan was to get into med school, and by God's grace that was going to work. So I just kept looking for jobs where I didn't need specific certification. It was hard to find a job, as I mentioned, but I can be very persistent. I wasn't just applying for jobs online, I was also randomly showing up to doctors' offices like, hi, I applied for a job and I haven't heard back yet. Mind you, I could have just applied for the job 2 hours ago, but you didn't need to know that. Point is, I applied for a job and you haven't said anything, so here I am in your office physically. It worked. It worked. It worked. I applied for a specific job at a surgery center, and I think that same day, drove there and I was like, hi, I applied for so and so job and I haven't heard back yet. They called the manager. She showed me around and she was like, when can you start? And so I started on Monday. This was a great job. God is good. God is so good. As I mentioned, this was a surgery center, so I was working for 4 colorectal surgeons. I took care of patients after their colonoscopies or after minor surgeries at the surgery center. Because the doctors knew I wanted to go to medical school and that I had applied, they taught me as much as they could. And if they ever saw something interesting, they would call me to come see it. I also shadowed them at the hospital where I got to watch them perform major surgeries. The best part was that one of them wrote me an additional recommendation letter. Yes, my application was already submitted, but I could still submit recommendation letters. So I think that one was submitted in October. Now I don't remember the specific time, but it wasn't too late in the cycle to where it would not be helpful. While working this job, I would take days off when I needed to interview, and they were very understanding because they knew that was my goal. By spring, I had gotten a few acceptances, and I started medical school in August of 2021, like I'd initially planned on that very first timeline. So everything worked out. God is good. Everything worked out. And that, my friends, is how I transitioned from aerospace engineering to medicine. I think I covered everything, but if I didn't and you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Please also like the video, share it with anyone who might find it helpful, and also leave suggestions of other videos you might want me to make. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.